The first time anyone at the chapter saw the boy, he was kneeling in the wet grass of the cemetery off Route 9, laying a fistful of grocery store carnations against a granite stone that had no flowers of its own. It was the kind of cold that gets into the knuckles, the kind of gray morning where the sky and the asphalt are the same color and the world feels like it has stopped expecting anything good. Marcus Vane watched him from the gravel turnaround 40 feet away, one boot on the kickstand, the engine still ticking as it cooled. The boy did not see him. The boy did not see anything but the name cut into that stone. Marcus had come to visit his own dead. He had not come to watch a child grieve a man Marcus himself had buried 2 years before. Yet there the boy was, small and serious in a jacket 2 sizes too big, smoothing the cheap flowers like he was tucking them in. The name on the stone was Daniel Reyes. Marcus knew that name, the way a man knows the scar on his own hand. He did not approach. He let the boy finish. He watched the small shoulders rise and fall, once hard, and then the boy stood, wiped his palms on his jeans, and walked back toward the cemetery gate where a tired-looking woman waited in a sedan with a dented fender. The boy climbed in. The car pulled away, and Marcus Vane sat on his idling motorcycle for a long time, staring at a name he had carried for 2 years like a stone in his own chest. That was how it started. Not with a threat, not with an engine in the dark, with a child and a handful of carnations and a debt that nobody living had thought to collect. To understand it, you have to go back. Daniel Reyes had been the youngest full patch in the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, Bay River chapter, and the best mechanic any of them had ever known. He could listen to an engine the way a doctor listens to a chest, and tell you what was wrong before he ever lifted the hood. He was 29 when a delivery truck ran a red light on Sycamore and took him off his bike, and out of the world in the space of a single breath. The man who ran that light had a blood alcohol level that should have ended his license forever. He had a lawyer instead. He walked. And the Iron Saints, who did not forget and did not forgive easily, had buried Daniel and learned, slowly, that the family he left behind had simply vanished. They had tried to find them. Daniel had a girlfriend. The brothers knew that much. And the girlfriend had a son who was not Daniel's by blood, but had been Daniel's by every measure that counted. After the funeral, the woman had taken the boy and gone, and the trail had gone cold inside of a month. People who are drowning do not always want to be found by the people who remind them of why. The club had let it lie. They had told themselves she wanted privacy. They had told themselves it was kindness. It was not kindness. It was a debt left unpaid, and Marcus had known it every single day. So when he saw that boy at the grave, something in him that had been clenched for 2 years finally let go and then clenched again, harder, around a single thought. The boy had found the grave. The woman had not run far. And whatever had kept them away, whatever had kept that stone bare of flowers, until a child scraped together carnation money, was a thing the Iron Saints needed to know about. Marcus did not chase the sedan. He was not built for chasing. He went back to the clubhouse, a low cinder-block building on the industrial edge of town, with a steel door and a hand-painted sign, and he told the president what he had seen. The president of the Bay River chapter was a man named Augustus Hale, called Gus by everyone who had earned the right, and Mr. Hale by everyone who had not. He was 61 years old, built like a retaining wall, with a gray beard that reached the second button of his shirt, and a stillness that made loud men go quiet. He had founded the chapter. He had buried 11 brothers. He listened to Marcus without interrupting, his big hands flat on the scarred bar table. And when Marcus finished, Gus was silent for a long moment. "Daniel's boy," Gus said finally. His voice was a low gravel that seemed to come up out of the floor. "Laying flowers. With money he scraped up himself, by the look of it," Marcus said. "Carnations, the dollar kind. And the mother, in the car, wouldn't come to the stone." Gus turned that over. A man like Gus did not waste words, and he did not waste anger. "Find them," he said. "Quiet. Bah! I want to know where that boy sleeps, and I want to know why his mother won't walk 40 feet to the grave of a man who loved him. It did not take long." The club had a member they called Switch, a wiry young man of 24, with quick eyes and a laptop bag where his cut should have had road dust, and Switch could find anyone who had ever signed a lease or registered a car. By the next evening he had a name, an address, and the beginning of a story that turned every man at that table cold. The woman's name was Elena Mara. She was 34. She and her son, whose name was Theo and who was 9 years old, lived in a rented half of a duplex on the far side of town, the kind of street where the streetlights came on late and went dark early. She worked 2 jobs. She had no car payment because the dented sedan was paid off and barely running, and 11 months ago she had married a man named Royce Calderon. Switch said that name like it tasted bad because by then he knew what it meant. Royce Calderon owned half the commercial real estate on the north side and sat on the boards of things that have boards. He gave to the right campaigns. He had his photograph taken with the mayor at a ribbon cutting. He was the sort of man whose name opened doors and closed investigations, and somewhere in the 11 months since Elena Mara had married him, the light had gone out of her and her son had started scraping together carnation money to bring to a dead man's grave. "She married him," Marcus said slowly, "and then she ran from us." "No," Gus said. He had been listening from the head of the table, and now he leaned forward and the leather of his cut creaked. "She didn't run from us. She ran from being seen. There's a difference. A woman doesn't hide a child's only good memory unless someone is making her hide everything." The room went quiet in that way. A room goes quiet when a number of dangerous men all arrive at the same conclusion at the same time. Switch kept digging because that was what Switch did, and what he found over the next 3 days built the rest of the picture, beam by beam. He worked at the corner of the barred table where the wood was scarred deepest, a thermos of bad coffee at his elbow, and the blue glow of the screen on his face, and the brothers learned to read his progress by his silences. When Switch went quiet and still he had found something, when he muttered and scrolled fast, it was a dead end. He went quiet a lot those 3 days. Royce Calderon had been married before. His first wife had filed for divorce and then, abruptly, had not, and had moved out of state with a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to stop a bullet. Switch pulled the docket number and read the filing dates aloud slow, and the gap between the date she filed and the date she withdrew was 9 days, and every man at that table knew that 9 days was not how long it takes a woman to change her mind. It is how long it takes a powerful man to make her. There had been a noise complaint at the Calderon house 4 months back, called in by a neighbor, and a patrol car had come and gone in 11 minutes, and the report had been filed under nothing at all. Switch found the dispatch log and the case number, and then found that the case number led to a file with nothing in it, an empty drawer with a label on the front. 11 minutes, he said, tapping the screen. Somebody called scared enough to dial, and 11 minutes later it's like it never happened. There was a pattern here, and the pattern had a shape the Iron Saints recognized. because it was the same shape as every powerful man who had ever decided the rules were for other people. A pattern is not proof, though, and Gus Hale did not move on feelings. "We don't know what's happening in that house," he said. "We think we know. Thinking isn't knowing. Before this club does one single thing, we are going to know, and the boy and his mother are going to be safe while we find out. Nobody rides up on that house. Nobody. We do this right, or we don't do it." So they waited, and they watched, and they did it right. What they learned slowly, and most of it they learned from Theo, though the boy never knew he was teaching them anything. Marcus took it on himself to go back to the cemetery because the boy had come on a Saturday, and Marcus gambled that he would come again. He was right. The following Saturday, the dented sedan pulled into the turnaround, and Elena Mara stayed in the car, and Theo walked the gravel path with another fistful of carnations. And this time, there was a man sitting on a motorcycle near Daniel's stone, not blocking it, just there, the way a tree is just there. Theo stopped. 9-year-olds know danger, and they know the absence of it, and something in the way the big man sat, loose and patient and unhurried, told the boy this was not a thing to run from. Still, he was careful. He glanced sideways. "You knew him?" Marcus asked. He did not turn his head. He let the boy decide how close to come. "He was my dad," Theo said. Then, because 9 is old enough to know the technicality matters to grown-ups and young enough to resent that it does, he added, "Not my real dad, but my real one." "I know the difference," Marcus said. "I knew Daniel a long time. He fixed my bike more times than I can count. He never let me pay him right. Always said he'd get it next time." Theo's eyes came up at that, sharp and hungry, and Marcus understood that this boy was starving for something, and it was not food. It was Daniel. It was any piece of Daniel that anyone would give him. The boy had a dead father and a stone with no flowers and a mother who could not bear to look at it, and here was a stranger who had known the man when he was alive and laughing and getting grease under his fingernails. So Marcus gave him pieces, small ones, true ones. He told the boy how Daniel used to hum while he worked and never knew he was doing it, how Daniel had once driven 60 miles in the rain to fix a brother's bike on the side of the highway and refused gas money, how Daniel talked about a kid he was helping raise like that kid had hung the moon. Theo went very still at that one. "He talked about me all the time," Marcus said, and it was true, and the boy's chin trembled and held. That was the first Saturday. There were others. Elena never got out of the car, but Marcus noticed she stopped parking so far away, and one morning she lifted 2 fingers off the steering wheel in something that was almost a wave. Trust is built in inches with people who have been taught that everything costs more than it's worth. The Iron Saints knew about that kind of trust. Most of them had learned it the hard way themselves. It was Theo who finally said the thing out loud, though he did not mean to. It was a cold Saturday in the back half of October, and the boy was quiet, quieter than usual, and when Marcus asked him a question, he flinched before he answered, a small, full-body flinch, the kind a person learns. Marcus had seen that flinch on grown men coming off bad years. He had never gotten used to seeing it on a child. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "Careful, easy." "Royce says I'm not allowed to come here anymore," Theo said to the carnations. "He says it's morbid. He says my mom needs to stop letting me, quote, wallow in dead people." The boy used the word, quote, the way kids do when they are repeating something said in a voice they hate. "He took my allowance. That's how I bought these. I had it hidden, Marcus kept his voice level the way a man keeps his hand level over a flame. "Why's he care if you come see your dad?" Theo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the thing, "Because my mom doesn't cry when she's mad at me. She cries when she comes back from here, so Roy says we're not coming back. And when Roy says something, that's how it is. He says he's the one paying for everything, so he makes the rules. He told my mom that if she ever embarrasses him, she'll find out he's not a man you embarrass." The boy looked up. "What does that mean?" Marcus knew exactly what it meant. He had heard it said by exactly that kind of voice his whole life. It meant the velvet was off, and the iron was showing. It meant a man had stopped pretending the kindness was free. "It means," Marcus said carefully, "that you and your mom are coming to see your dad as long as you want to. That part's not up to Royce." It was, of course, entirely up to Royce. That was the whole problem. It was entirely up to Royce, 'cause Royce held the lease, and the money and the future, and the only door out, and Eliana Mara had a 9-year-old son, and a dented car, and 2 jobs that did not add up to an apartment of her own. Royce had built a cage out of comfort and called it a marriage, and the bars were made of the exact things a desperate woman would be most afraid to lose. Marcus rode back to the clubhouse, and he did not hum like Daniel used to. He walked in, and he put both hands on the bar table, and he told Gus what the boy had said, word for word, including the part about embarrassing him. Gus listened. Then the old man stood, and that was a thing that did not happen quickly or for small reasons, and the whole room felt it. "Switch," Gus said. "I want everything, not the man's secrets, his foundations, how he holds what he holds, who he owes, what he's hidden. A man who tells a woman she'll find out who he is when she embarrasses him is a man who has done this before and gotten away with it. Find the ones who didn't get away. Find the first wife. Find the noise complaint. Find all of it. We are not going to touch him. We are going to take the ground out from under him, and we are going to do it so clean that when he falls, there is nothing left to grab." "And the woman?" Marcus asked. "The woman gets a choice," Gus said. "That's what he took from her. We're going to give it back. But she has to be the one who makes it. We don't get to be one more man deciding her life for her. That's the whole point. That's the only point." He looked around the table at his brothers, every one of them gone, still and grave. Daniel loved that boy like blood. We failed Daniel once already, by letting them disappear. We don't fail him twice. What followed was not a war. The Iron Saints had learned a long time ago that the men they hated most could not be beaten the way the movies said. You did not ride up on a man like Royce Calderon. You did not break his windows. The moment you did, you became the story, the lawless bikers, the menace, and he became the victim, and the system that protected him would close around him like a fist. No, a man like Royce was beaten in daylight, with paper, with the very institutions he thought he owned, turned patiently against him until they no longer recognized his face. Switch worked for 2 weeks. He found the first wife in a state 3 borders away, living quiet, and he did not call her because Gus had said, "You do not put a frightened woman in the middle without her say-so." Instead, Switch found the lawyer who had handled her settlement, a man long since soured on his former client, and through channels that were entirely legal and entirely relentless, he confirmed what the shape of things had already told them. There had been a pattern. There had been a non-disclosure agreement, because there had been something to disclose. And the something had a name and a date, and buried in a county filing that Royce had paid good money to forget a paper trail. It went further than one marriage. Royce Calderon's empire of commercial leases stood on a foundation that did not bear close looking. There were buildings he had acquired cheap from people who had run into sudden trouble with permits and inspections, trouble that arrived right before he made his offer and vanished right after they sold. There was a councilman whose re-election had been quietly generous to Royce's interests. There was a pattern here, too, and it was the same pattern, a powerful man arranging the world so that other people had no choices left, and every thread of it was sitting in public records that no one with the patience and the motive had ever bothered to pull together. Switch had the patience. The Iron Saints had the motive, and what they assembled, beam by beam, over those 2 weeks, was not a weapon you fired. It was a structure you simply revealed. And the revealing would do all the work. None of it could move until Elena Mara chose. Gus was immovable on that. So on a Tuesday, when Royce was at a board meeting 2 cities away, Marcus drove to the duplex, alone, in a truck instead of on his bike, because a motorcycle in that driveway was a headline waiting to happen. He knocked. Lena opened the door on the chain and looked at him through the gap with the flat, exhausted wariness of a woman who has learned that men at the door are rarely good news. "You're the one from the cemetery," she said. "Theo talks about you. He's not supposed to." "My name's Marcus. I knew Daniel." Something moved behind her eyes at the name, and the chain stayed up, and Marcus respected it. He talked to her through the 4 inches of gap for 10 minutes, and he did not push, and he did not promise to save her, because Gus had been right. That being saved by another man was just a different cage. He told her only this: that Daniel had been theirs, and that made Theo theirs, and that the club had spent 2 years carrying a debt they had not been able to pay, that they knew some of what her life had become, that they were not asking her to do anything, or trust anyone, or leave anything. They were only telling her that a door existed, and that it was hers to walk through or not, on her own time, and that nothing she did or didn't do would cost her or her son a thing. That last part was the part she did not believe, because everything had always cost her, and Marcus could see her not believing it, so he did the only thing he could. He left her a number, and he left her alone. "Whenever," he said. "Or never. Both are fine. We're not going anywhere, and we're not keeping a tab." Then he walked back to his truck and drove away without looking back, because a woman in a cage learns to measure men by whether they linger to see what their kindness bought them. And Marcus was not going to be one more man waiting to be thanked. She did not call for 9 days. On the 10th day she called, and her voice was very steady in the way that costs everything, and she said, "He took the flowers out of Theo's room. Theo dried them and kept them in a shoebox, and Royce found them and threw them in the trash and told Theo to grow up. Theo is 9 a breath. I need to know if the door is real, because I can't open it and find out it's painted on a wall. Not with my son. I can't." "It's real," Marcus said. "Tell me when." What happened next happened over 6 careful weeks, and almost none of it looked like anything. There were no engines in the night. There was a lawyer, a real one, hired quietly and paid for by a club fund that existed for exactly this and had never been used for anything finer. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and she was 60, and she had spent 30 years watching men like Royce Calderon win, and she had the cold, patient anger of a person who had decided, late, to stop letting them. She met Elena in a borrowed office with the blinds half drawn, and she did not soften anything. He will try 4 things, Dana said, and she counted them on her fingers, and she was right about all 4 before they happened. There was a long afternoon in which Elena Mara sat at the scarred bar table in the clubhouse with Gus Hale across from her. And the old man slid a folder toward her and said only, "You don't have to do anything with this, but you should know what's true. A person makes better choices, knowing what's true." Inside the folder was everything Switch had found, organized, sourced, undeniable. The first wife, the shape of the man she had married, laid out in daylight. The clubhouse around her was not what she had raced for. She had expected noise and menace, and instead there was an old jukebox playing low, and a younger member refilling her coffee without being asked, and the smell of engine grease and cigarette smoke, and something underneath it that she could not name for a while and then could. It smelled like a place where nobody was going to hurt her. Elena read it without crying. When she finished, she sat very still for a long time. Then she said, "He told me I was nothing without him. He told me 100 times. I started to think the math worked out. That I owed him." She closed the folder. "The math never worked out. I just couldn't see the numbers." "Now you can," Gus said. "What you do with them is yours." What she did with them was choose, and the choosing was the whole story, because everything the Iron Saints had built was only the floor she stood on while she did it. The lawyer filed for divorce, but that was the smallest part. The settlement Royce Calderon would have used to bury her, the non-disclosure agreement he would have built to silence her, those things only work on a person who is alone and afraid and can be made to believe the powerful man holds every card. Elena Mara was not alone anymore, and she was not afraid in the old way, and when Royce's lawyers came with their thick papers and their soft threats, they discovered that the woman across the table had a folder of her own, and behind the folder, a patience that did not blink. Royce tried the things men like Royce try. He tried to freeze the accounts and found that the lawyer had anticipated it, that Dana Whitfield had moved first and quietly, and that the money Elena needed was already where he could not reach it. He tried to spread the word that Elena was unstable, an unfit mother, and found that the word would not catch, because too many people had quietly been waiting for someone to say the true thing about Royce Calderon, and now someone had. A teller at his bank remembered a thing. A contractor he had stiffed remembered another. The stories had been sitting in people the whole time, unspoken, the way they always are, waiting for the moment it stopped being dangerous to say them. He tried once to use the connection he was proudest of, the councilman, and discovered that the councilman had abruptly become very hard to reach, because the councilman had been shown a different folder and had done the math on his own future and decided that Royce was a sinking ship he would very much like to not be photographed standing next to. The councilman did not return 3 calls, and then changed his number, and Royce Calderon sat in his glass office and understood slowly that the ground he had always stood on had never been ground at all. It had been other people holding still, and the people had started to move. The institutions Royce thought he owned did not rescue Elena. They never do. In stories like this, and they never did, turned patiently in the light. Though made to look at what they had been paid not to see, they stopped protecting him. That was all. That was enough. The wall he had built around himself was made of other people's willingness to look away, and one by one, those people decided to look. By the time it was over, Royce Calderon was not in prison. Men like Royce rarely are. He was finished, though, in every way that he had ever cared about. The boards asked for his resignation. The leases unwound as partners read the writing on the wall and pulled out. The photograph with the mayor came down off the wall of a restaurant he used to own a piece of. He kept his freedom and lost the only thing he had ever truly owned, which was the power to make other people small. And on the last day, in a conference room with too much glass, when the final papers were signed and Elena Mara stood to leave with full custody and her old name back, Royce said the thing that men like him always say at the end. He said, "You think those animals are your friends. You think they did this for you." Elena stopped at the door. She did not raise her voice. "They did it for a man you never met," she said. "I just got to stand where he would have stood." Then she walked out into the flat white daylight of the parking lot, and the door swung shut behind her. And Royce Calderon was alone in all that glass with nobody left to make smaller. That should have been the end. For most stories, it would have been. Yet there was still a debt the Iron Saints had not paid, and there was still a wedding that had never happened, and there was still a boy who had laid flowers on a grave with money he had to hide. Because here is the thing about Elena Mara. When the dust settled and she was free, the club did not adopt her and did not move her into some clubhouse fantasy and did not turn her into a story about bikers saving a woman. She got her own apartment, a real one with a lease in her own name, in a building where the streetlights worked. She kept her 2 jobs at first, and then, because the lawyer had made sure the settlement ran the right direction this time, she did not need both, and she took the one she liked and let the other go. She built her own door and walked through it on her own legs. That was the point. Gus had said it from the start, that was the only point. Somewhere in that long winter, though, between the cemetery Saturdays and the careful work of getting free, a different thing had been growing, slow and unannounced. The way the truest things grow, it was not between Elena and the club. It was between Elena and one man who had sat on a motorcycle near a grave and never once lingered to be thanked. Marcus Vane had not gone back to the cemetery to find anything for himself. He had gone because a boy was grieving and a brother's name was Bear on a stone. Saturday after Saturday, though, he had come to know a woman who had been ground down to almost nothing and had not let go of the one thing that mattered, her son, and her son's right to love a dead man. He had watched her choose again and again. The harder honest thing over, the easier safe lie. And Elena, for her part, had come to know a man who measured his kindness by whether it cost the other person anything, and found, to her own slow astonishment, that there was a kind of man who gave without keeping a tab. It was Theo, in the end, who said it out loud, the way it had been Theo who said everything out loud. It was spring by then. The carnations on Daniel's grave had become better flowers, brought openly now in daylight by a boy who no longer had to hide his allowance. Marcus had taken to meeting them there, and the 3 of them would stand a while. And sometimes Marcus told another small, true story about Daniel, and the stone did not feel so bare anymore. On one of those mornings, Theo looked up at the 2 grown-ups standing on either side of him, and he said, with the brutal directness of a 9-year-old who has decided a thing is obvious, "You should just get married. Then we could all come see Dad together, and it wouldn't be weird." Elena turned the color of the carnations. Marcus looked at the sky as if the sky had asked him a question. And Daniel Reyes, who had loved that boy, like the moon, said nothing, because the dead don't, but the wind moved through the cemetery oaks in a way that Marcus would later swear was an answer. They did not rush it. People who have been burned do not rush toward fire. Still, the thing kept growing, and it kept being true, and a year and some months after a stranger first watched a boy lay carnations on a grave, Marcus Vane asked Elena, Mara, to marry him. And she said yes, and Theo, who had called it first, was insufferable about being right for a week. The wedding was a small thing by design. Elena did not want a spectacle. She had spent 11 months as a prop in another man's spectacle, and she was done being looked at. So the plan was a county courthouse on a Saturday morning, and then a backyard, and nothing more. Marcus understood. Marcus, who had spent 2 years quiet at a graveside, understood quiet. The Iron Saints, though, had been carrying a debt for 3 years now, and a debt like that does not ask permission to be paid. On the morning of the wedding, Elena and Theo and Marcus came out of the courthouse into the late spring sun, the three of them, a small new family blinking in the light, and the parking lot was full. Not with cars, with motorcycles, rank on rank of them, chrome catching the morning sun, lined up in a formation so precise it looked like something out of a dream, and standing beside them in their leather cuts with the death's head patches were the brothers of the Iron Saints, every chapter, every man who could ride, and the chapters they had called, and the chapters those chapters had called, until the count was not a dozen and was not 50, it was 200. 200 riders had come from 3 states on a Saturday morning to stand witness for the family of a brother named Daniel Reyes, who had loved a boy who was not his by blood, but was his by every measure that counted. Elena's hand went to her mouth. Theo's whole face came apart with a joy too big for it. And Gus Hale, 63 now, and gray to the second button, stepped out of that wall of leather and walked forward and stopped in front of the three of them. And the old man's voice when he spoke was not loud. Daniel couldn't be here, Gus said, so we came in his place. Every one of us knew him or knew somebody who did, and that's the same thing. He'd have stood up for this boy at this wedding. He doesn't get to, so we will. He looked at Theo, and something in the old face that had buried 11 brothers went soft in a way few living people had ever seen. Your dad rode with us, son. That makes you ours, not for today, for always. Anybody ever tells you you don't have a family, you tell them you've got 200, and we'll be standing right here when you need us to prove it. Theo did not say anything clever. For once, the boy who said everything out loud had nothing to say. He just walked forward and put his arms around as much of the old man as a 9-year-old could reach, and Gus Hale, founder of the Bay River chapter who did not bend, for small reasons, bent all the way down and held him. There was no spectacle after that. Not really. There was a backyard, and there were 200 motorcycles parked down a quiet street in a way that the neighbors would talk about for years, and the children of that street would never forget. There was food, long folding tables of it, brought by men who did not look like they cooked and mostly did not, and one enormous bearded rider who guarded a smoker like it held the secret of his soul and would not let anyone near the brisket until he said so. There was the low, constant rumble of men who did not say much standing around being glad, the clink of bottles, the occasional bark of laughter that started in one corner and rolled across the yard. A toddler from down the block wandered over to stare at the bikes, and a 110-pound enforcer who had buried 2 friends that year got down on his knees in the grass to show her how the headlight worked. Eliana moved through it, like a woman learning that a crowd could be a shelter instead of a stage. She kept waiting for the bill to arrive. For the moment, somebody would lean in close and tell her what all of this was going to cost, and it kept not coming, and somewhere in the 3rd hour she stopped waiting. And at one point in the long golden afternoon, she found Marcus standing a little apart, watching it all, the way he had watched from the gravel turnaround that first cold morning. "You never once asked me for anything," she said. "Not the whole time. Why?" Marcus thought about it. He was not a man who answered fast. "Daniel used to say he'd get it next time," he said finally. "Every time I tried to pay him for fixing my bike, he'd just say, 'Next time.' And then there wasn't a next time." He looked out at the boy, at Theo, who was sitting on a curb, being shown the engine of a Harley by a man 4 times his size, and listening like it was scripture. "I figured this was next time. I figured I was finally paying Daniel back. Turns out I had it backwards." He looked at her. "Turns out he was paying me." Elena did not have an answer for that, so she did the only thing that fit. She took his hand, and the two of them stood in the spring light and watched a boy who had once hidden his allowance to buy dollar carnations get handed the whole world by 200 men who had ridden in from 3 states to make sure he never doubted he was wanted. Daniel Reyes still lies in the cemetery off Route 9. The stone is the same. It is never bare now, though. There are flowers on it most Saturdays, good ones, and sometimes there is a fresh club patch left propped against the granite. And once a year on the anniversary of a wedding, there is a long line of motorcycles in the gravel turnaround, engines off, men standing quiet, a boy growing taller each year, laying flowers he no longer has to hide. The debt is paid. It was paid the day 200 riders filled the courthouse parking lot. And it goes on being paid every Saturday in carnations and chrome and the simple refusal of a hard world's hardest men to let a child believe he was ever, for one single day, alone. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever loved someone the world forgot to honor, stay a moment and remember them now, by name, the way that boy remembered his father. And if you would like more stories about the people, the powerful overlook, and the unlikely ones who refuse to let them be forgotten, you know what to do. We will be here. We are not going anywhere, and we are not keeping a tab.